Hello, my name is Olivia Snyder. I'm a potter, painter, and maker. What's going on today? Well, I previously did a short little video on having fun with a jelly pad, also known as a jellygraph or a hectograph. While doing research on hectographs, I stumbled upon a DIY recipe for making your own. Naturally, I wanted to explore this further, so I did. In this video, I embark upon making my own primitive printing device. It's very easy when doing research on printing techniques such as this to find yourself tangled up in zine history, which I did. It's also easy to fall into what's known as yak shaving, which honestly describes being a maker to a T. On to the jelly. Now, my jelly pad is commercially made. I had a treat yourself day at the craft store and I bought a smaller one for about $20. There are recipes that allow you to make a jelly pad at home with organic materials, and I wanted to try it. The pad is impermanent, degradable materials versus commercial polymers. However, for someone looking for a day of making and experimentation, the endeavor is financially accessible. The materials can be found at most local big box stores. Editor's note, this took significantly longer than a day, but in a good way. Not in a bad way where you have to make like 85 trips to Home Depot to get plumbing supplies. So let's check it out. How do we make a jellygraph at home? I found a recipe in an old Popular Mechanics how-to book, which was found through following sources from a video demonstrating a hectograph. Links in description. Actually, falling into the jellygraph research rabbit hole, I found multiple recipes for making your own gelatin-based duplicator. I went with one in Popular Mechanics, which, as an aside, is chock full of all kinds of insanity meant for kids to try out. Eek. As a maker, I already had all the necessary ingredients to make a jelly pad. Just not enough. I dropped by the local H-E-B, picked up gelatin, a metal tin, and some glycerin. Total cost? About $15, with the glycerin being $5 for 4 ounces. I needed 6 ounces, so about 2 bottles. The gelatin needs to soak overnight so it gets nice and juicy. 12 ounces of water to 1 ounce gelatin. These do not need to be exact. Next day, put 6 ounces of glycerin into a double boiler and heat it to 200 degrees. The heated glycerin, when poured into the soaked gelatin, will melt everything. Pour the melted mixture into your pan, go to the local pool for a few hours while it solidifies. Easy peasy. Because I'm following a recipe from 1913, naturally I want to use an ink recipe as well. The Popular Mechanics article suggests an ink made from methyl violet as a base. Keep in mind, home chemistry was a lot more fast and loose in the olden days. It took a little bit of research to learn exactly what methyl violet is, can I obtain it, and is it dangerous? Methyl violet is also known as crystal violet, which is primarily used in industrial dye applications. You can get a hold of small amounts, presumably for pH testing applications, since it changes color based on what it detects. I found a few grams for about $6 online, but I didn't order. I already happen to have gentian violet on hand, obtained from my local pharmacy. It wasn't exactly clear, but gentian violet appears to be used semi-interchangeably with methyl violet. Gentian violet is already suspended in alcohol, so the first step of my recipe is semi-completed. Technically, it was 2 parts methyl violet to 2 parts alcohol, and it's probably a little bit more concentrated than my gentian violet solution, but good gravy, gentian violet stains like crazy, so I'll take it. Disclaimer, I am not familiar with how to exactly calculate how many parts of alcohol to violet are in a 1% gentian violet solution. This is not my wheelhouse, and I'll likely mess it up without someone checking my work over my shoulder. So, down to the fun. Let's draw a picture and slap it on the jelly pad and see if it reproduces. I tried to use my ink naturally, that is, how I would normally use watercolor or a commercial ink. Of course, I'm starting off with a fairy doodle, why wouldn't I? None of the instructions I ran across indicated whether or not the ink should be completely dry or not, but did indicate that the pad should be lightly sponged before putting on the master. So I dried the master, sponged the pad, and then placed the master on for the recommended minute. Neat! There is indeed an image of the fairy master in my jelly. Now all we do is place a sheet of paper on the jelly and smooth it out to make sure it contacts the entire surface. peel it up, and there's a copy. The copy is serviceable. It's lighter where my lines used less ink and darker where I used more solid coverage. Immediately, I wonder if this is because my ink is too diluted from using gentian violet rather than powdered methyl violet. Unknown. Easiest way to test this is to use pure gentian violet as my ink. It's already liquid, and I know it stains like crazy, and it's stable. The results seem better, but not good enough. I can pull about 10 to 15 copies before the results get quickly weak, and I'd like to be able to pull more. I admit this is where my project turned into yak shaving. I wanted better ink, but where do I get the materials for ink? Do I want to make the ink? Other people have used this. Should I drop the cabbage on those? I decided to go with buying spirit duplicating sheets. Originally, these sheets were used in older spirit duplicating machines. They have stayed alive because their second life is a way for tattoo artists to place a transfer of their artwork directly onto people's skin to give them a guide for inking. Neat. Spirit duplicators work well with thermal printers, so a design can be directly printed out and used for transfer. I've needed a large format thermal printer for another duplicating project, so I find one that seems to suit my needs. The sheets, they work great. I used part of a sheet that failed to get through the printer to test how many pulls I could get from one word. Oh, so many. It's incredibly dark, and the copies are also fairly dark. They get darker the longer you leave the paper on the jelly pad. I'm pleased, obviously, but I have a goal: to be able to reproduce a zine on site for people about making a jellygraph. That means, oddly enough, I need to be able to reproduce my zine on the spirit sheet in order to put it onto the jellygraph. The thermal printer was a bust, so I'm at a crossroads. Do I gamble on another thermal printer, hoping it's better? Do I seriously embark upon my desire of obtaining a personal laser cutter in order to help facilitate experimental projects like this? Do I sit back and wait for thermal facts to appear, or do I suck it up and hand trace my zine out on the spirit sheets every time I want to demonstrate the jellygraph? I speculate on modifying my 3D printer to draw things out for me when, in an epic big brain move, I look at the shelf above the 3D printer and realize I in fact own a silhouette cutting machine, which can already draw things for me. Sometimes getting that wrapped up in a project really screws with your perception. I wasn't lying about the yak shaving. Boy, howdy, I wasn't. Regardless, I ran a piece of scrap through the silhouette machine. It worked pretty darn well. Testing it on my pad, the print is clean, easy to see, and makes a decent number of copies. I'm excited. It's at this point that the pad has been out for a few days and it's got some ghosting going on and developing some teeny bubbles. I decide to try and melt it down and re-pour it. I use the double boiler again, mostly because this is a good way to prevent things from inadvertently burning in the pot. It melted down in a few minutes and re-poured perfectly. I wonder how many re-pours you can get out of a pad. I noticed my new pour wasn't as thick as the first, presumably because of water loss through evaporation. I added about a tablespoon more water, but was hesitant to add more in case this caused the pad to become too juicy. While the pads are cooling, I'm messing with the zine I intend to be my jellygraph document. This is one of the reasons I like working with vector-based graphics program. It's considerably easier to translate my work into a file for a plotter or even a laser cutter. If I suppose I ever want to make a laser zine. Back to the yak shaving, I'm still interested in a thermal printer of sorts. In my hunt, I stumble across heated foil quills designed to go into cutting plotters. That's me. I have a cutting plotter and more than one use case. So I drop the scratch on heated quills. From what I can tell, they add a little oomph to pressure-based spirit sheets. They may be completely unnecessary, but I've got future projects that can possibly make use of them, plus now I can add fancy-ass gold to paper projects, LOL. If you're looking for a way to beat big inkjet and their outrageous prices, printing out a full-page document with a plotter will not save you time and probably not money. It took a little under 45 minutes to complete what is essentially a wall of texts. But it transferred beautifully. There are enough little imperfections to make my cold black heart so happy. I peel away the carbon and the top sheet and aim for the middle of my pan. Some kind of jig probably would have been a good idea. While you can pull the master away from the jelly instantly, you get better results when you let it sit for a few minutes. After 5 minutes, I pull the mash star off the jelly and it looks dark. Time to print! They look amazing. The first pull is pretty dark and they get almost imperceptibly lighter as you go. Of course, if you leave the paper on for a long while, more ink transfers, so you get a darker print. My goal was to print as many as I could to see how much you could actually get from one edition. But I ran into an issue. My jelly started pulling up from the pan. I hadn't really foreseen this as a possible problem, but the more copies I made, the more it pulled up. I can only think that's because my pad was so thin, it didn't really have enough material to grab the sides of the tray. What do we do when something like this goes sideways? That's right, we keep going and see what happens. Eventually, the pad wouldn't sit back in the pan correctly, so I just pulled it out entirely. It was very stretchy, and I see the potential for doing really distorted art or text. If you got really clever, you might be able to wrap it around a cylinder and make a print roller of sorts. I'm not exactly sure how you'd keep the jelly from flopping off, but another time, another project. Finally, I went ahead and cut the image I used for the cover off and stamped a few images to use as covers on other editions that I may print with my inkjet printer. I'll melt the pad back down and see if it can be reused, and I wonder how long the jar would store in the fridge. Who knows? Thoughts? I tried to push how small I could get away with text. The ink does bleed just a little bit, so my smallest text is illegible for the most part. My QR code is unable to be read by my phone, though I'm not sure if that's due to illegibility or because my ink color isn't especially contrasted against the paper. The text for the majority of my document is readable, and I love how it looks. It's a soft, muted purple look that you couldn't ever get with an inkjet. There are too many little weird imperfections, and it just has that je ne sais quoi that you get with a largely handmade process. Next time I make a zine in this manner, I'll probably make one with more images and less text, make everything a little bit larger to avoid things becoming blurry. Now, before I get to my closing thoughts, I decided to try a pure gelatin mixture. No glycerin, since I've seen people try this. Glycerin can be a bit pricey compared to just plain gelatin. For my pad, I kept the amount of water the same, but doubled the amount of gelatin. It worked just fine, and if you're looking for a cheap one-day project to do, you can get away with a homemade jellygraph for under $5. I thought it was a little bit wetter than the pad with glycerin and just a little bit softer. Originally, this was supposed to be a quick video. Maybe I'd take a day or two to record everything, edit it, then post. This has been over a month of experimenting and researching and playing. The purpose of this entire endeavor was just to explore an historical method of duplicating documents. Hectographs are an important part of the history of independent publishing. Using off-the-shelf ingredients, any person had the ability to send out duplicates of their zine, newsletter, or their comics. In pre-internet days, heck, in pre-desktop publishing days, that was not a small thing. The power of being able to share ideas across the country by mailing someone a copy of your zine is incredible in the digital age. Now imagine the impact on pocket communities in an era when it was not an insignificant cost just to telephone someone in a neighboring city. Independent publishing will always be important, no matter the modern forms it takes. But there is something that solidifies that fact when you actually experience firsthand a replicating method someone could easily create in their own home. In a digital era, it's incredibly easy to tap something and hit out post, and your thought is instantly available to billions. Now, slow that process down significantly. First, you must write out your idea. You must edit it. Then you must go through the rigmarole of soaking and mixing a gelatin-based pad. You must retype or rewrite your information using a method that is difficult to correct if you make a mistake. There are a limited number of copies you can produce, not the thousands that an inkjet printer can shoot out in a matter of minutes. Then, when you've copied and prepped your prints, you must distribute them, whether through the mail or at a local shop or directly to other people. There is a physicality and slowness of the information that causes it to be processed differently than a quickly posted tweet. Our bodies have what is called muscle memory. When we hold or create something, our bodies reinforce what our mind sees. there is no muscle memory in a digital era. I will only briefly mention how curated and advertising-oriented information has become with monolithic websites like Reddit, Facebook, Twitter. Seeing and distributing information has become a crapshoot. You're not guaranteed to reach an audience, even if you give the monolith money to try to show folks your stuff. And it's easy to brush off the, back in my day, we read an actual book and we liked it type of sentiments. But honestly, it's important to stop and appreciate the history of individuals creating and distributing what they thought was important. And with that, I end what was a month-long exploration into an outdated, obsolete printing method. In true entrepreneurial fashion, I have genuine jellygraph copies of my Jellygraph zine available, as well as inkjet copies, and, because I'm a swell person, a free PDF for you to print and distribute without modification in any reproductive manner you see fit. Check out my website at fairyhive.com. Thank you, and have a magical day.